spooky place.
Imagine a stormy night, the kind where the wind howls like a wounded animal and the rain lashes against the windows like it's trying to get in. Now picture a stranger at your door, a pale, silent woman with a smile that doesn't quite reach her hollow, unsettling eyes. You let her in, because what else can you do? But by morning, she's gone, leaving behind only a note. Thank you for letting me in. What happens next will make you wish you'd never opened that door. This is the story of a family and a house that became the playground of something far darker than any storm. So, turn off the lights, listen closely, and whatever you do, don't look behind you. Before we begin, I request you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. On that note, let's begin. The silent guest. The storm raged outside, a symphony of howling winds and relentless rain that battered the old farmhouse nestled deep in the woods. The family, Father Thomas, Mother Eliza, and their two children, 12-year-old Clara and 8-year-old Ben, huddled together in the dimly lit living room, the fire crackling in the hearth their only source of warmth. The power had gone out hours ago, and the storm showed no signs of abating. A sudden knock at the door made them all jump. Thomas exchanged a wary glance with Eliza. Who could be out in this weather? He grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace, just in case, and approached the door. When he opened it, the wind nearly ripped it from his hands. Standing on the porch was a woman, her pale face illuminated by a flash of lightning. She was drenched, her dark hair clinging to her face, and her eyes, deep, hollow, and unsettling, seemed to pierce through him. She wore a tattered dress that clung to her thin frame, and her lips curled into a faint, almost unnatural smile. "Come in quickly," Eliza called from behind Thomas, her maternal instincts overriding her unease. The woman stepped inside without a word, her movements eerily smooth, as if she were gliding rather than walking. She nodded her thanks but remained silent, her smile never wavering. The family offered her dry clothes and a seat by the fire, but she declined with a gentle shake of her head. She simply stood there, her gaze fixed on the flames, her smile never fading. Clara and Ben stared at her, half fascinated, half terrified. There was something about her presence that made the air feel heavier, the shadows deeper. As the night wore on, the family tried to make conversation, but the woman never spoke. She only smiled. Eventually, they gave up and retired to their rooms, leaving her by the fire. Thomas locked the doors and windows before bed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't matter. The next morning, the storm had passed, and sunlight streamed through the windows. Thomas was the first to wake. He stepped into the living room and froze. The front door was wide open, as were all the windows. The fire had long since died, and the pale woman was gone. On the table lay a single sheet of paper, the words scrawled in jagged, almost frantic handwriting. "Thank you for letting me in." Thomas's heart pounded as he called for Eliza. Together, they searched the house, but everything seemed normal, except for the doors and windows. As they regrouped in the kitchen, Clara let out a scream from her bedroom. They rushed to her side to find her pointing at the wall above her bed. Scratched into the plaster were 3 words: "I'm still here." The family's panic grew as they discovered more messages throughout the house, scratched into the floorboards, etched into the mirrors, even carved into the wooden beams of the attic. Each one was the same: "I'm still here." Eliza insisted they leave immediately, but when they tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. The windows, too, were sealed shut, as if an invisible force held them in place. Thomas grabbed his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The landline was dead. As the day wore on, strange things began to happen. Objects moved on their own. Shadows stretched and twisted in ways that defied logic. Ben claimed he saw the pale woman standing at the foot of his bed that night, her smile wider than before, her eyes black as coal. Clara refused to sleep in her room, convinced the scratches on the wall were growing longer. Desperate, Thomas decided to search the attic for anything that might explain what was happening. As he climbed the creaky stairs, he felt a cold draft, though the air was still. In the corner of the attic, he found an old, dust-covered trunk. Inside were yellowed photographs of their house from decades ago, newspaper clippings about a series of disappearances in the area, and a diary belonging to a woman named Margaret. The diary told a chilling story. Margaret had lived in the house over a century ago. She had been accused of witchcraft by the townsfolk, and, in a fit of rage, had cursed the house and its inhabitants before vanishing into the woods. The last entry read, "They will never be rid of me. I will wait. I will return, and when I do, I will take what is mine." Thomas's blood ran cold. He realized the pale woman wasn't just a lost stranger. She was Margaret, and she had come back to claim the house and its occupants. That night, the family huddled together in the living room, too terrified to sleep. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the fire flickered and died. In the darkness, they heard it, a soft, rhythmic scratching, like nails dragging across wood. It grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from every direction. Then, the pale woman appeared, her smile now a grotesque, ear-to-ear grin, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. She raised a bony finger and pointed at Clara. "Mine," she whispered, her voice a guttural rasp that sent shivers down their spines. The family screamed as the walls began to bleed, the messages appearing in crimson. "I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here." The last thing Thomas saw before everything went black was the pale woman's face, inches from his own, her smile impossibly wide, her eyes filled with a hunger that would never be satisfied. When the neighbors finally came to check on the family days later, they found the house empty. The doors and windows were wide open, and on the table lay a single note. "Thank you for letting me in." And in the attic, the trunk was open, its contents scattered, as if someone, or something, had been searching for something, or someone. To this day, the house remains abandoned, though locals claim to see a pale figure standing in the windows, smiling, always smiling. And if you listen closely on stormy nights, you might hear the faint sound of scratching and a voice whispering, "I'm still here." The abandoned house stood as a grim monument at the edge of the woods, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of time and neglect. The locals avoided it, whispering stories of the family that had vanished without a trace. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and not everyone heeded the warnings. A group of teenagers, Emma, Jake, and Mia, dared each other to spend the night in the house as part of a Halloween dare. Armed with flashlights, snacks, and a shaky bravado, they broke in through the back door, which hung crookedly on its hinges. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint, metallic tang of something they couldn't quite place. "This place is creepy as hell," Jake muttered, his flashlight beam darting across the walls. The scratches were still there, faint but unmistakable, spelling out the same phrase over and over. "I'm still here." Emma rolled her eyes, though her heart was racing. "It's just an old house. Probably some kids messing around." Mia, the most skeptical of the group, wandered into the kitchen. Her flashlight caught something on the table, a piece of paper, yellowed with age. She picked it up, her breath catching as she read the words aloud. "Thank you for letting me in." The room seemed to grow colder. Jake laughed nervously. "Okay, that's weird, but it's probably just a prank." They decided to set up camp in the living room, where the fireplace still held the charred remains of fire that had burned out long ago. As the hours passed, they told ghost stories, trying to outdo each other with tales of horror. But the house had its own story to tell. Around midnight, they heard it, a soft, rhythmic scratching like nails dragging across wood. It started faint, almost imperceptible, but grew louder with each passing second. Emma's flashlight flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, shaking his flashlight. It wouldn't turn back on. Mia's voice trembled. "Guys, do you see that?" They followed her gaze to the far corner of the room, where a pale figure stood, her back to them. Her dark hair hung in wet strands, and her tattered dress clung to her thin frame. She was perfectly still, her head tilted slightly, as if listening. "Hello," Emma called, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, she began to turn, her movements slow and deliberate. When her face came into view, they saw it. The same grotesque, ear-to-ear grin, the same hollow, glowing eyes. Her smile widened impossibly, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. The teenagers screamed, scrambling to their feet. They bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before they could reach it. The windows rattled in their frames, and the scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if the walls themselves were alive. Mia's flashlight flickered back on, illuminating the room. The pale woman was gone, but the walls were bleeding, the messages appearing in crimson. "I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here." Jake grabbed a chair and hurled it at the window, shattering the glass. "Go. Now." They climbed through the broken window, cutting their hands on the shards, but they didn't care. They ran into the woods, not stopping until they reached the safety of the road. When they finally looked back, the house was dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. But something had. The next morning, the teenagers returned to the house with the police, determined to prove they hadn't imagined the whole thing. But the house was empty. The scratches on the walls faded, the note on the table gone. The officers dismissed their story as a Halloween prank gone too far. That night, Emma woke to the sound of scratching. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and saw it. A pale hand reaching out from under her bed, its fingers clawing at the floorboards. She screamed, but no sound came out. The hand grabbed her ankle, its grip icy and unrelenting, and pulled her under. When her parents found her bed empty the next morning, they called the police, but Emma was never found. The only clue was a single sheet of paper on her pillow, the words scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Thank you for letting me in." Jake and Mia tried to move on, but the pale woman wasn't done with them. Jake began seeing her in his dreams, her smile growing wider each night, her eyes burning into his soul. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, until he was nothing but a hollow shell of himself. One night, he disappeared, leaving behind a note on his bedside table. "I'm still here." Mia was the last. She moved to another town, changed her name, and tried to forget, but the pale woman followed her. She saw her in reflections, in the corners of her vision, always smiling, always watching. One stormy night, as the wind held outside, Mia heard the scratching again. It was coming from inside her closet. She opened it, her hands trembling, and found the pale woman waiting, her grin impossibly wide, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "Mine," the woman whispered, her voice a guttural rasp. Mia's screams echoed through the house, but no one came to help. When the storm passed, Her house was empty, the doors and windows wide open. On the table lay a single note. "Thank you for letting me in." The house still stands, its secrets buried deep within its walls. But the pale woman is never far. She waits, her smile growing wider with each passing year, her hunger never satisfied. And if you listen closely on stormy nights, you might hear the faint sound of scratching and a voice whispering. Years passed, and the house became a local legend, a cautionary tale told around campfires and whispered in the dark. But legends have a way of resurfacing, especially when they're rooted in truth. A documentary crew, drawn by the stories, decided to investigate the house. They were skeptics, armed with cameras and equipment, determined to debunk the myth once and for all. The crew, consisting of director Mark, sound technician Lisa, and cameraman Ryan, arrived at the house on a stormy evening. Much like the night the family had vanished, they set up their equipment in the living room, the scratches on the walls now faint but still visible. Lisa shivered as she ran her fingers over the words. "I'm still here." "Creepy," Ryan muttered, adjusting his camera. "But probably just some kids messing around." Mark, ever the skeptic, rolled his eyes. "Let's get to work. We'll do a sweep of the house, capture some footage, and wrap this up." As they explored the house, the atmosphere grew heavier. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the temperature dropped with every step. Lisa's audio equipment began picking up strange noises, whispers, faint laughter, and the unmistakable sound of scratching. She tried to brush it off as interference, but the noises grew louder, more distinct. In the attic, they found the trunk. Its lid was slightly ajar, as if someone, or something, had been rifling through it recently. Inside were the same yellowed photographs, newspaper clippings, and Margaret's diary. Mark flipped through the pages, his skepticism wavering as he read the final entry. "They will never be rid of me. I will wait. I will return. And when I do, I will take what is mine." As he closed the diary, the attic door slammed shut behind them. The crew spun around, their flashlights illuminating the pale woman standing in the corner. Her smile was wider than ever, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. She raised a bony finger and pointed at Lisa. "Mine," she whispered, her voice a guttural rasp. The crew screamed, scrambling for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The pale woman began to advance, her movements slow and deliberate, her grin stretching impossibly wide. Ryan swung his camera at her, but it passed through her like smoke. Lisa's audio equipment exploded in a shower of sparks, and the room was plunged into darkness. When the storm passed, the house was silent. The crew's van was still parked outside, their equipment scattered across the living room. But Mark, Lisa, and Ryan were gone. The only evidence of their presence was the footage on Ryan's camera, which showed the crew's final moments in grainy, distorted detail. The last frame was a close-up of the pale woman's face, her smile wide, her eyes filled with a hunger that would never be satisfied. The documentary was never released, but the footage leaked online, sparking a new wave of interest in the house. Paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, and skeptics alike flocked to the site, each hoping to uncover the truth. But none of them returned. The house remained standing, its doors and windows always wide open, as if inviting the next victim. One stormy night, a young couple, drawn by the stories, decided to spend the night in the house. They were determined to prove that the legend was nothing more than a myth. As they stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them, and the air grew cold. On the table lay a single sheet of paper, the words scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Thank you for letting me in." The couple screamed as the scratching began, louder and more frantic than ever. The walls bled, the messages appearing in crimson. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here. And in the attic, the trunk creaked open, its contents spilling out onto the floor. The pale woman emerged, her smile wider than ever, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. She raised a bony finger and pointed at the couple. Mine, she whispered, her voice a guttural rasp. The house fell silent once more, the storm raging outside. But if you listen closely, you might hear the faint sound of scratching and a voice whispering, I'm still here. And somewhere, deep within the house, the pale woman waits, her hunger never satisfied, her smile growing wider with each passing year. She will always be there, waiting, watching, and ready to claim her next victim. The house still stands, its doors and windows always wide open, as if inviting the next victim. But beware, once you step inside, you may never leave. The pale woman is always watching, always waiting, and she will never let you go. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe for more scary stories.